It began without warning on an ordinary Thursday evening when the sky, once calm and familiar, turned into a theater of strange and impossible lights. Across the world, in cities sprawling across continents, the stars seemed to pulse and shift, as if breathing. In New York, a crowd gathered in Times Square, staring upward as a dozen shimmering orbs danced above the skyscrapers, their movements too deliberate to be natural. In Tokyo, neon-lit streets fell silent as hundreds of tiny glowing specks zipped across the skyline, sketching patterns no human mind could understand. Cape Town's beaches were dotted with onlookers, their faces bathed in ghostly colors, as an enormous spiral of green and violet spun above the ocean. At first, the reaction was wonder. Children squealed with excitement. Young couples took selfies under the dazzling sky, and news anchors scrambled to make sense of the spectacle, their voices bubbling with barely contained thrill. Scientists were called in, telescopes turned skyward, and governments quietly began issuing notices to military bases to stay alert. Yet as minutes stretched into hours, the playful awe soured into a restless, unspoken fear. The lights began to move differently, not random, not drifting, but with an eerie precision, stopping sharply, aligning into impossible geometries before shifting again in perfect harmony. The phones began to glitch first. Videos taken of the phenomenon turned into static, or showed images that hadn't been filmed. Radios blared bursts of white noise. Air traffic controllers from London to Moscow lost contact with dozens of planes for brief, heart-stopping moments. Birds took to the skies in vast panicked flocks, darkening the horizon. Dogs, even the gentlest ones, barked and growled at the air. And somewhere deep in the oceans, seismic monitors picked up strange vibrations that came and went without explanation. As the night thickened, the lights grew brighter, casting long, otherworldly shadows across cities and countryside alike. The northern lights were seen as far south as Cairo, yet these colors were richer, more liquid, flowing across the stars like spilled paint. Around midnight, the great cities of the world stood almost paralyzed, their citizens pressed against windows, huddled on rooftops, or clustered in wide-open fields, unable to look away. In Paris, a mother clutched her child tighter under a trembling streetlight. In Mumbai, a group of students argued whether this was some government experiment or a new kind of natural disaster. In the frozen streets of Moscow, old men crossed themselves and whispered prayers their grandfathers had taught them. Yet no one could explain why, at the exact same moment everywhere on Earth, an overwhelming sense of being watched washed over the world. It was as if something immense and unseen loomed just beyond the clouds, gazing down with a patient, inhuman intelligence. The lights began to descend slowly, like drops of glowing rain that never touched the ground. They hovered above landmarks, parks, lakes, forests, silent, untouchable, full of intent. Rumors raced faster than facts. Some claimed to see figures inside the lights, silhouettes moving with jerky, unnatural motions. Others swore they heard a faint humming sound that set their teeth on edge. Conspiracy theories exploded online, but no explanation stayed solid for more than a few minutes before dissolving into panic and confusion. In Washington, an emergency meeting of military leaders decided to ground all aircraft until further notice. In Rome, the Pope led a midnight prayer from the steps of the darkened Vatican, calling for calm. In Beijing, satellites were ordered to scan the upper atmosphere, but all data returned scrambled and corrupted. All across the world, screens flickered with breaking news, churning out words that made the heart race. Unknown. Aerial phenomena confirmed. Public advised to stay indoors. Military. Forces on high alert. Yet staying indoors felt useless when the sky itself had turned against them. By the time the first rays of dawn bled across the horizon, the lights had begun to coalesce, forming vague shapes that grew sharper by the second. Every breath drawn that morning felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself understood that something ancient and vast was unfolding. The last peaceful night in human history had ended, and everyone, whether they admitted it or not, felt the same deep, gnawing certainty. The world had changed forever, and there would be no going back. The first of the great ships arrived with the sunrise, slipping through the broken clouds like monsters born from the dreams of madmen. They made no sound, no great thunder to announce their coming, only the growing awareness that something unfathomable had entered the world. Over New York, the first shadow fell, swallowing entire city blocks in a darkness deeper than night. And as the stunned crowds lifted their heads, they saw it, an enormous vessel, blacker than space, its surface crawling with shifting patterns that defied understanding. It hung in the sky, motionless, as if weighing the city beneath it. Soon, more appeared, descending over London, Cairo, São Paulo, Sydney, Moscow. Each one unique in form, some shaped like jagged spears, others like coiling serpents or floating fortresses adorned with impossible geometry. The ships seemed alive, their metallic skins rippling as if breathing, reflecting the rising sun in 1,000 broken fragments. Panic spread like wildfire. Highways clogged with cars as entire populations tried to flee cities at once, though there was nowhere to go that the shadows did not already reach. Soldiers deployed in the streets, weapons pointed skyward, though every hand trembled against the triggers. Fighter jets screamed into the morning air, circling the ships at a cautious distance, but none dared fire. Those who dared to watch from rooftops and windows felt a primal terror, the kind buried deep in ancient bones. The terror of prey standing before a predator it could never hope to fight. In the control rooms of the world's greatest armies, generals barked commands while staring at screens filled with images that defied all training and protocol. Radar systems failed to track the ships. Heat sensors showed them as colder than the surrounding air, as if they absorbed life itself. Every attempt at communication, every signal beamed into the sky, was met with silence. Television stations, desperate for explanations, broadcast live footage of the hovering giants, their anchors struggling to hide the fear in their voices. Wild rumors spread. Some claimed the ships were a warning, others insisted they were a rescue, a final gift before some unseen doom. In rural villages, elders spoke of old prophecies, stories told around fires of sky gods returning in the end times. In the heart of London, the ancient face of Big Ben stood frozen under the gaze of a ship that seemed to pulse with slow, deliberate power. In Rio, Christ the Redeemer was bathed in a terrible light, as one of the smaller vessels circled, the mountaintop like a hawk sizing up its prey. Across the seas, entire naval fleets sailed into position, surrounding the crafts that hovered low over oceans, casting mile-wide shadows into the deep blue. Yet still, no action came from the ships. They did not fire weapons, did not unleash plagues or bombs. Their silence, their absolute stillness, spoke louder than any attack. Hours passed. In the streets, people fell into a grim routine of watching the sky, whispering guesses, making silent promises, or preparing to run the moment the ships stirred. Governments urged calm through official broadcasts, but behind closed doors, orders. were given for nuclear missiles to be primed. Satellites in orbit captured images that would never be released to the public. Some ships larger than entire cities, others bristling with structures that hinted at terrible, unknown purposes. Scientists, once so confident, now spoke in hushed, helpless tones, their models and theories crumbling before the truth that had arrived uninvited. By afternoon, something strange began to happen. The ships started to move. Slowly at first, shifting position as if searching or listening to a voice no human ear could hear. Great beams of cold light lanced down from some of the vessels, scanning the ground with mechanical patience, freezing whatever they touched. Not with ice, but with a stillness so perfect that nothing within the beams seemed to exist at all. The world stood on the edge of a knife, trapped between awe and annihilation. Mothers wept quietly in their kitchens, priests locked their churches and prayed not for salvation, but for understanding. In the gleaming towers of power, leaders realized, with a heavy and bitter clarity, that the planet no longer belonged to humanity. It had become a stage, and the real players had just stepped into the light. As the second sunset fell over the earth, casting a blood-red glow across the clouds, a single truth became impossible to deny. Whatever had come was beyond reason, beyond diplomacy, beyond any defense the world could mount. And waiting in that terrible, suffocating silence was the certainty that this was not the end, it was only the beginning. The decision to make contact came not from hope, but from desperation, a last flicker of control grasped by leaders who knew control was already lost. Across continents, hastily formed councils gathered in bunkers and war rooms, sending out the brightest linguists, scientists, and diplomats to craft a message meant for gods. Enormous arrays were turned toward the alien ships, broadcasting greetings in every known language, bursts of mathematical codes, ancient music, and hopeful messages spoken by trembling voices. Giant screens were wheeled into public squares, onto tarmacs and mountaintops, beaming the human face skyward as a symbol of peace. The world watched, holding its breath, as humanity's best and brightest stretched out a hand to the cold, unanswering heavens. At first, there was only silence, a silence so profound that it seemed to seep into the bones of every living thing. Then, without warning, one of the colossal ships responded. A single point of blinding light bloomed on its surface, growing into a spiral that twisted and unfolded like a living thing. Across every screen, every device, the same image appeared. A shimmering, incomprehensible shape that hurt the eyes and clawed at the mind. Voices followed, not one, but thousands, layered atop one another, speaking words that slid away from understanding the moment they were heard. Linguists tried to break it down, desperate for patterns, but every attempt dissolved into madness. The sounds were wrong, stitched together with an alien logic that no human mind could truly grasp. In Geneva, a team of negotiators chosen for their calm under pressure attempted to broadcast a reply. Their faces, solemn and brave, were seen around the world as they spoke of friendship, of coexistence, of a future shared among the stars. Their message finished. The world waited. For a heartbeat, hope flickered. A childish hope that perhaps fear had been foolish, that perhaps the visitors had come bearing wonders instead of doom. That hope died a swift and brutal death. The ships moved, not with the slow grace they had shown before, but with sudden, terrible purpose. Across dozens of cities, beams of light lashed out, striking power plants, military bases, communication hubs, hospitals, They did not destroy in the conventional sense. Instead, wherever the beams touched, reality itself seemed to falter. Buildings crumbled into fine black dust. Vehicles twisted into grotesque shapes, melted without heat. People caught in the light vanished without screams, leaving only faint human-shaped shadows scorched into the ground. Panic erupted. Armies that had stood poised for hours now opened fire with everything they had, filling the skies with missiles, bullets, and desperate prayers. The attacks did nothing. Weapons that had once made nations tremble passed harmlessly through the ship's shifting forms, like stones thrown into smoke. In some places, smaller craft detached from the larger vessels, descending toward the earth with predatory elegance. They resembled machines at first, but those who glimpsed them more closely saw hints of something more: fluid shapes, tendrils, that moved with dreadful intelligence, and glowing many-eyed faces that seemed to drink in the world around them. Screams filled the cities as these entities moved among the people, studying, sampling, dismantling the very fabric of human life with cold, mechanical curiosity. Across the world, chaos became the new law. Families fled their homes, governments fell silent, and entire regions went dark, swallowed by terror and confusion. In the ruins of shattered cities, survivors whispered that the aliens had not misunderstood humanity's message. They had understood it perfectly and judged it unworthy. Somewhere in the depths of an underground facility, a handful of leaders argued whether surrender was even possible or whether it was already far too late. Above ground, the ships loomed larger than ever, their silent menace blotting out the stars, rewriting the sky into a warning that none could mistake. First contact had come, not with open hands, but with a blow that shattered the fragile illusion of human significance. The earth itself seemed to recoil, groaning under the weight of a future no longer its own. As night fell once more, darker and more suffocating than any night before, one truth became clear to every trembling heart across the world. Humanity had knocked on the door of the universe, and something terrible had answered. The warning came not as words, but as visions that burned themselves into the minds of every living human at the same instant. One moment, the broken cities still trembled under the silent shadow of the alien ships. The next, reality itself cracked, apart, and every soul on Earth was dragged into a shared nightmare. Eyes went wide, bodies froze mid-scream, and the world seemed to pause as a flood of images poured in. Scenes of devastation so total, so surgically precise, that the mind recoiled, in horror. Towering human monuments, great cities, ancient temples, all shone crumbling into ash without a sound. Oceans boiling away under black suns. Forests turned to dust as unseen forces stripped the earth bare. In each vision, one common thread wove through the destruction: humanity's helplessness. No armies fought, no heroes rose. The people were nothing more than insects crushed beneath an unstoppable will. The warning made clear that resistance was not bravery, but foolishness. That survival would come not by fighting, but by surrendering the very idea of freedom. Across battlefields, soldiers dropped their weapons and stared at the sky, tears mixing with dust and blood. In churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples, the faithful sank to their knees, unable to tell if they prayed to old gods or new monsters. Governments, what few still functioned, sent frantic messages begging for clarification, pleading for terms, offering unconditional surrender. There was no reply. Above the planet, the ships remained silent and still, as if daring humanity to misunderstand again. In remote corners of the world, some refused to bow, forming pockets of resistance that clung to old dreams of defiance. Their fates were swift and merciless. Without fanfare, beams of twisted light lanced down from the hovering giants, and entire regions vanished from existence, erased so completely that even memory seemed to falter. Survivors spoke in hushed, broken voices of the horrors they saw during the visions, things not captured in any broadcast, sights too monstrous for words. Some claimed to have glimpsed the true form of the invaders, beings of shifting flesh and metal, neither alive nor dead, birthed in the dying screams of ancient suns. Others whispered of a colossal throne drifting through the void, upon which no king or queen sat, only a writhing mass of thought and hunger beyond comprehension. Scientists, desperate to make sense of the catastrophe, pieced together fragments of data and came to one grim conclusion. The invaders had been watching Earth for centuries, perhaps longer, weighing humanity's soul and finding it lacking. The arrival had not been an accident. It had been a judgment long prepared, a sentence long overdue. In secret bunkers, last-ditch plans were drawn up, hopeless strategies built on fantasy and pride, but none could look one another in the eye and pretend belief in their chances. Across the world, the air grew heavy, filled with a strange hum that seemed to seep from the ships themselves, a low, mournful sound like the death rattle of a planet. Animals fled or fell silent, sensing the finality in the air. Even the oceans, once so restless, grew unnaturally still, as if mourning a future stolen before its time. On the edges of crumbling cities, bands of survivors huddled around fires, telling stories not of heroes or salvation, but of what once was, trying to carve some fragment of humanity into memory before it too was wiped away. Among them, children listened with wide, hollow eyes, too young to understand the full weight of the warning, yet old enough to feel its terrible certainty. The skies themselves seemed poisoned, a sickly red hue spreading through the clouds as if the planet bled from a wound too deep to heal. And always, the ships remained, silent, watching, judging. No more attacks came, no more visions were forced upon broken minds. The warning had been given, clear and final: survive if possible, obey if desired, but never again mistake mercy for weakness. As the third night since the arrival fell, colder and darker than any that had come before, the last shreds of human arrogance crumbled. The earth belonged no longer to the children of dust and water. It was now a conquered world, a forgotten prize in a war so vast that even the stars trembled at its echoes.